welcome everybody. Just get this off my screen. Okay, thank you, Geraldine. Welcome everybody to our Equality Committee's event on women living with debt and the cost of living crisis. And we have Siobhan here from the Women's Support Network to give us to present her findings on the research that she has carried out on that subject. As you know, we've been in austerity now from at least 2010. And of course, if you'd listened to any of the Tories at their conference the last couple of days, it's evident that we're not going to get out of it any time soon. And they're talking about us only going into austerity now. I'd like to know when we ever left it. And as we all well know, women being the caring network of their homes and society do take the biggest brunt. We're part-time workers, we're mothers, we also look after elderly family and also children, the works, and all of that is going to be impacted badly by the coming austerity measures, further austerity measures, austerity squared, even if that's what you want to call it. So Siobhan, I'd like to hand over to you now. You can give us a brief or give us your presentation, and then I'm happy to take any questions or comments. And if you can try and answer them for us, Siobhan, at the end. But if we try and keep the questions to Siobhan finishes her presentation, that'll be helpful.
Okay. Thanks very much, Tina. I'm just going to share screen if that's okay. Try and do that now. Can you all see that okay?
Yep, that's fine.
Great. So, okay. Okay, thanks everybody, and thanks to Geraldine for asking me to present to you today. My name's Siobhan and I work for the Women's Support Network, which is part of the Women's Regional Consortium, which is a consortium of 7 women's sector organisations on whose behalf I carry out this research. So it's good to be able to speak to you about the research, which was just launched in the last couple of weeks. And it's a follow-up to a piece of research we did in 2020, also on the issue of women and debt. So we did the research with women in the run-up to Christmas last year and into this year. And it basically talked to them about the debts that they have, the pressures that they're feeling on their household budgets, and also looked at where they borrowed money from. It won't surprise you to hear that cost of living pressures were all over the research and featured heavily in the discussions with women. Particularly the cost of energy and the cost of food, as well as a lot of talk about school costs. So that's school uniforms, shoes, and extracurricular activities that children might or might not be involved in. So we carried out the research through a series of focus groups in women's centres across Northern Ireland and with our consortium partners as well. And we also did some questionnaires and a number of individual telephone interviews, which formed the basis for a number of case studies in the report. The final report was published in September, as I said, and it's available for download from the consortium's website. If I remember, and Geraldine, you can remind me if I don't, I'll put the link in after I finish speaking so that you have a link to that. The longer paper is there, but there's also a shorter briefing paper with it. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to put up some quotes from the women as I go along, so that you can see in their words what they told us. So those will break up some of the slides that I have going through. Okay, so we're looking at the cost of living pressures on debt levels as well. So we've got inflation, which is currently just sitting under 10%, with the cost of the most basic items rising most considerably. We looked at things, if you look at the way things have risen, you'll see that things like baby products are up more than that at 14.6%. Food prices at 12.8%, with milk alone up at 34% increase. So that gives real concern for those on the lowest incomes who will have greater difficulty absorbing these steep increases. The Institute for Fiscal Studies released statistics that show that the poorest fifth of households could face inflation of 18%. And that's because they spend a larger proportion of their budgets on energy and food, the prices of which are rising so fast. Joseph Rowntree research into poverty in 2022 shows that within the poorest 20% of households, those with children use a higher proportion of their weekly spending on housing, energy, food, and clothing. For lone parents, the spending makes up 55% of the total, and for couple parents, it's 51%. And we also see many low-income households feeling the impact of rising costs of food. Research by the Food Standards Agency shows growing concern about the cost of food, with it a major worry for 3 out of 4 people, 76% of people in the UK. 1 in 5, 22%, said they skipped a meal or cut down on the size of meals because they didn't have enough money to buy food. And as we know, that often impacts on the women in the households. The latest ASDA income tracker has found that 20% of UK households had negative disposable incomes in June 22, the largest percentage decrease in the income tracker's history. It showed that 1 in 5 had an average weekly shortfall of £60 between the earnings and the money needed to cover essentials. The cost of living crisis is driving these record falls in the income tracker, with Northern Ireland showing the largest annual contraction in discretionary income at 32.3% for any region in the history of the tracker. And then we've got a range of debt charities warning about increases in problem debt. So Citizens Advice have warned, they've said that the cost of living crunch will impact on 1 in 10 families who will face financial crisis. Step Change research has also found that 1 in 5 people think that external financial pressures, such as increases in the cost of living, will cause them to go into debt they would be unable to pay back. So this is the first quote from one of the women then, and it really shows that women have already been cutting back, and this crisis is just going to make things worse. So even small treats in this case, like going for an ice cream, are going. One woman told us that she used to buy buns on a Friday for her children and it cost about £12, but this has had to stop as she just didn't even have the money to do that one small thing anymore. And worryingly, these experiences have come before some of the most recent price increases. So if we look at the impact of the crisis on women, economic crises tend to hit women harder, and this one is no different. Women are more likely to be living in poverty and are more likely to be in receipt of social security benefits and in low paid and precarious work. They've also been harder hit by welfare reform and austerity changes. So they were already in a poor situation coming into this crisis. Women tend to have lower levels of savings than men, and caring responsibilities mean that they're less able to increase their hours of work in response to a crisis like this. We're all well aware of women soaking up poverty in households, so going without heat and eating to protect their children. They've already cut back, and now there's nowhere else to go. Women also often have the main responsibility for managing household budgets and for buying food and paying for children's items, including school costs. Joseph Rowntree Foundation research found that single parents are by far the most likely of any family type to be struggling with poverty. And as you know, most single parents are women. Soaring energy bills are eating up the substantial amounts of some of household incomes. The percentage of income spent on gas and electricity for low-income households is on average around 18% of income after housing costs. For lone parents, they spend 25% of their incomes on energy bills. Just showing you another quote now. So this one really illustrates the decisions women are forced into making between eating and heating, and how this limits their lives. It shows how they act as the shock absorbers of poverty in the home, and we heard this time and time again in our research. But this poverty is very often unseen. As this woman says, "I've made dinner sometimes and there hasn't been enough for everyone. So I've lied and said it's all right, I've eaten, so I can try and make it stretch." A significant proportion of the women we spoke to were in receipt of some form of social security benefit. And the the safety net provided by the social security system has been weakened by a decade of welfare reform changes, meaning that many people are unable to meet the costs of essential items, and they're often unable to cope with unexpected life events, such as a washing machine breaking down, for example. So that means that they're forced into debt as a result. Research shows that 54% of those in problem debt receive support through the social security system, and 43% of those receiving social security have used credit to pay for essentials, which is a key risk factor in developing debt problems. There are particular problems around the universal credit 5-week wait, with research by the Trussell Trust concluding the wait has led to acute and immediate financial hardship and worsened households' longer-term financial resilience. Since the social fund has been replaced by discretionary support, there has also been a weakening of this safety net for the most vulnerable borrowers, meaning that it no longer provides the support it once did. As you know, discretionary support provides help through the social security system for those in crisis situations in the form of grants and loans. Then we have around 60% of all universal credit claimants living on less than the standard rate of universal credit because they're paying back various forms of benefit debt. So these are debts to government, including repaying advance payments which have been made to them to get through the universal credit 5-week wait. Reducing social security payments to repay government debts really causes people to struggle to afford the essentials and just drives them further into poverty and debt. So this quote helps to illustrate the inadequacy of benefits and the constant struggle to make them stretch, often leading to debt. And it also shows that constancy of debt. As this woman says, debt never goes away. I never seem to shift it. And there are also significant links between debt and mental health issues, with research showing that 1 in 2 adults with debts has a mental health problem. Poor mental health can be both a cause and a symptom of debt problems. Research by the Health Foundation shows that 20% of people in problem debt report bad or very bad health, compared with 7% of people not in problem debt. And research by the Trussell Trust shows that the population of people referred to food banks in their network during the pandemic saw an increase in the proportion of people reporting mental health problems. Financial Conduct Authority COVID survey data looking at anxiety levels by gender shows that levels of stress due to negative changes in financial situation were higher among women compared to men. So that was 22% compared with 19%. And they were generally higher on all measures for women. Many of the women that we spoke to in our research reported feeling stressed and anxious about money. It was a constant problem in their lives, and they felt that they were never able to get away from it. And this took a real toll on them, on their health and well-being, and also on their relationships with others in the house. It showed that those discussions showed a real mental stress that comes with these money worries. As this woman says, it's horrible to always be worrying about money. So I'm just going to take a quick run through the main findings from the research on this slide. So we found that 51% of the women we spoke to had borrowed using high cost credit. So that's things like credit cards and store cards, buy now, pay later, payday loans, that type of thing. And it also found that 6% had borrowed through illegal lending, with 2% borrowing through paramilitary loans. We found that 32% of the women had borrowed from family and friends, and we're very concerned about how that will be impacted by the cost of living crisis, because many were borrowing from family and friends who also had very stretched budgets, and how that might then be further closed up by the cost of living crisis. 60% of the women reported finding it difficult to meet their debt repayments or had missed repayments. And again, we have concerns about the impact of the cost of living crisis on that figure. 35% of the women reported using a food bank as a result of their debts or pressure to make ends meet. And 60% reported that their debts had been impacted by rising energy bills, and 60% also by rising food bills. So that shows those cost of living impacts on debts. 72% of the women felt that they were negatively impacted by being in debt, and most of that was around mental health, anxiety issues, and 47% reported feeling that their children had been negatively impacted by their debts. So these findings show the impact of debt and making ends meet around the time the cost of living crisis started to impact. So it's likely to be much worse now, but they do give an indication of a likely debt crisis following the pandemic and the cost of living crisis, and arguably also a mental health crisis, which is so linked to money worries and debt. So this quote shows the impact of the cost of living crisis. And as I said to you before, this impact is reflected over and over again in our research. The costs of energy as well as the cost of food were major issues for the women, and many reported struggling between eating and heating. Many were rationing their energy, doing things like, in this case, taking heat off a timer, as they couldn't afford to have it on for an hour. This is a rural case study and highlights the issues for those with oil heating. In rural areas, there's often no choice. You know, you have to use oil because there's no facility to have any other form of heating, and you need that amount of £100 in this case to afford a fill, but many just don't have it to do that. So sometimes they're resorting on the smaller drums of oil, which are really expensive, or else they're just not able to switch their oil on at all. And this quote shows the impact of low income on families and how money worries and debt also impact on children for the most basic things, including clothes and shoes. And sometimes if children don't have these things, it means that they're not able to take part in other things or activities or events that other children can. So it shows that the crisis is not just impacting on adults, but on children too. So just to continue with the findings, then these are a summary of the findings that came from the focus group sessions. So they're more about talking about what the woman said rather than putting figures on it. So it was obvious from those discussions that living on Social Security benefits didn't provide enough income to afford the essentials and meet basic household bills. And that drove many of the women to debt in order to make ends meet. And so the impact of increases in the cost of living are further putting a strain on the ability of Social Security benefits to meet basic household expenditure. And then we had discussions around savings, and some of the women reported that they were either unable to save at all, or what little they were able to put away was quickly used up in meeting everyday living expenses. And that was usually for quite small items such as school clothing or school shoes. So being unable to save means that they're unable to build up a financial buffer for unexpected events. And that ability to have savings would also help to provide some kind of protection against the cost of living crisis. And equally, for those who are able to save a little, the crisis will be impacting on their ability to do that. So again, that whole issue about women being the shock absorbers, going without food, clothes and heat came up again and again. And very particularly the case for lone parents in these discussions. And the women really discussed how negative it was for them to feel that they were unable to provide for their children, and how difficult it is for them not to be able to give their children what other people have. So that kind of feeling of being unable to provide properly for their children really impacted on them and was very emotionally distressing for them. So but then lots of discussion about rising costs of energy and food. Paying for electricity and for heat was a significant amount of their budgets, and they really felt the impact of the rising costs of energy. They talked about the strain of school costs, school uniforms, shoes, school equipment, and also the costs that some people take would take for granted, like, getting birthday presents or gifts at Christmas. These were really big impacts for these women. Most of the women reported that the level of debt and money worries they were living with had impacted negatively on their mental health, which caused anxiety and stress, and also impacted on their sleep and on their quality of life and their general well-being. That constant weight of debt and worrying about money never went away, and many felt that they had little chance to escape their debt situation, and you'll see that in some of the quotes which are to come. It was clear that living with debt and money worries meant they missed out on living their life to their full potential, and that their children missed out on activities and opportunities also because of a lack of money. This lack of money impacted on their social interactions, their ability to have a social life at all, to afford even very small treats, to take part in activities or clubs, and to take part in the ability to learn new skills. So this quote shows the struggle that many face living on benefits. So we're not long after a 4-year benefit freeze, and recently benefits only went up by 3.1% despite inflation being much higher. As I've already said, women have already paid the price for welfare reform and austerity. So they've cut back, and now there's nowhere else to go. So this quote is talking about benefits not going up, but everything else going up: rent, food, and electricity. So this quote shows some of the personal impacts of these money and debt worries. As this woman says, there's just nothing to lift the stress. This constant worry about putting food on the table, heating the home, and providing for children is always there. This quote comes from a single parent with 4 children who is in low paid work. And there was issues with working poverty also evident in this research too. And this all has undoubted impacts on mental health. On the basis of the research we carried out, the Women's Regional Consortium has made a number of recommendations, and I'll just go through some of these on the next couple of slides. So there is a need for greater access to affordable credit for low-income families as a way of reducing reliance on high-cost lending and avoiding problem debt, particularly for essential items. We also believe there is a great need for investment in the social security system to ensure that benefits meet the actual cost of essentials. So this would include things like making sure that Social Security benefits rise in line with inflation, which I know is a big topic of conversation today at the Conservative Party conference. Also, things like reinstating the £20 uplift to universal credit and extending to legacy benefits, the removal of the 2-child limit, which is a hugely gendered policy, and end to the universal credit 5-week wait, and the writing off of historic benefit debt, and that whole pausing of government debt deductions from Social Security benefits. So all of those things are important elements of making sure that Social Security is enough to provide a proper safety net for people. And then there's also the need for a longer term approach to rising energy costs, particularly for those on the lowest incomes, maybe perhaps by looking at some kind of social tariff. And we're, like many, concerned about the impact of the collapse of the Northern Ireland Executive and what this means for progress on a range of measures to help people in poverty. So there are a number of things that could be done but are not currently being done because we don't have an executive, including the implementation of the recommendations from the review of discretionary support. And also we're waiting on publication of the review of welfare mitigations, which we would hope would have some recommendations around strengthening of the mitigations beyond the bedroom tax and benefit cap mitigations that we currently have. We also want to see the FCA extend the rules that cover payday loans to the doorstep lending market, which featured quite heavily within the research. And we believe that action should be taken to prevent doorstep lenders from offering further borrowing to consumers who are already showing signs of struggling. And this quote shows how the impact of having no money limits women's lives and experiences. They feel like they can't even take part in small things like the rest of us take for granted, like going for a coffee with someone. Another woman we spoke to who was struggling on benefits and had a number of debts said she didn't want to be included in any social events at all because she just couldn't afford it. She asked a friend to take her name off a list of people who were going out to celebrate a friend's birthday because she knew she just couldn't afford the meal. So this gives these women no opportunity at all to lift the stress of their situation, and that has resulting impacts on their well-being, their mental health, and on their relationships. So just to finish the recommendations we made then, we also recommended that cross-departmental working is required to tackle the issue of paramilitary lending, and that needs to recognise the drivers behind this type of borrowing, including the inadequacy of Social Security benefits, that lack of access to low cost or no cost credit, and the problems caused by low paid and insecure work, which drives people to use this form of lending. We also want to see adequate funding made available to debt advice agencies to not only continue with their free debt advice services, but also to expand those in order to meet increasing demand as we face into this cost of living crisis. We also want to see, we also support the recommendations from the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute around help for debt with people with mental health issues. So that includes things like GPs, A&E departments and community mental health services, routinely asking people receiving treatment for mental health problems about their finances and provide clear signposting to help to those who need it. And also that banks and energy companies and other essential providers should proactively identify customers who may be struggling and improve the services they offer. For example, developing better processes for referring to debt advice, offering realistic repayment plans and freezing interest and charges, and reviewing their decisions on debt collection for customers who have mental health problems. We also want to see government acknowledge and support the role of community-based women-only provision in addressing women's poverty and financial vulnerability in rural and disadvantaged areas. We want to see an increase and longer term funding for grassroots women's organisations to enable them to continue the services they provide to financially vulnerable women in disadvantaged areas. And I'll just finish then with this quote, showing how money and debt worries impact on women, how they often shoulder the burden of these in the home and the mental stress that causes, coupled with the need to keep going to provide for their children and families. So this woman had been living with debt for many, many years. She has several doorstep loans with high interest rates, a paramilitary loan and credit card debt. She's in poor health and lives on benefits, but is taking part in training courses in a women's centre as she wants to try and get work and get herself out of debt. But she really struggles to meet her essential bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Siobhan. It's harrowing listening to that and to know that things aren't going to get any easier for a long time. It's an excellent work that's gone into that, and our heart does bleed for the poor women that are struggling so much. You mentioned there about stretching food and pretending that they've already eaten. I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s and my mum telling us, oh no, I don't eat meat on a Tuesday or a Thursday, knowing rightly there wasn't enough meat to go around the whole family. So it's sad to know that this isn't getting any better, and we have to fight hard and fast against the I don't know, I'll keep my language clean, against the people that are imposing this upon us. I'd like to open it up to the floor. If anybody has any comments or questions for Siobhan, I'm happy. If you want to raise your hand or even put them into the chat, we can call them out. Yep, Marty, go ahead.
Can I apologize? I'm standing outside work at the moment, so if the background noise, I apologize. I can't control it. I want to thank Siobhan for what I thought was a particularly insightful presentation. And I know that sort of it was predicated on inflation being 10%, under 10%. This is way above 10% now. So those figures that 1 in 5 people is not in office that will be increased. Now I know this is geared towards the women in debt, but I'm going to turn my hand here. I'm a single parent. I'm a single dad of 7 kids now. So all this hits home to me very much, and the impact, which is often forgotten about in when people in debt, impact on the mental health impact and how it's then handed down to children needs to be considered. So once again, I'm going to thank Siobhan for a very informative presentation. I'm glad this is recorded. I like to choose to get to say because there's other aspects there. So Siobhan, thanks so much for the presentation. It's given us all a lot to think about. It's given me personally a lot to think about, because a lot of those we vignettes, we stories are told where people talking, I could maybe in my own wee head relate to those. So Siobhan, thanks so much, and Tina, thanks so much for hosting this. It's very important. And thank you both.
Sorry, I thought you'd finished there, Marty. Thank you. It is, and as you say, the mental health, and as Siobhan has pointed out throughout, that is the mental health impact on people struggling with this is nearly impossible. It's very hard to get themselves out of the benefit system as well, because the jobs just aren't paying enough. And then they have the impact of keeping up with UC, and UC we know it wasn't designed to be a very friendly benefit. And as you know, Siobhan, NIPS have been campaigning and fighting welfare reforms from the day it came in, and our policy is to oppose it, although many of us are in the administration of the benefits, but we do try to do it with to the best of our ability and the fairest as we can, and also highlight what more and more people should be getting. And we have members that are in Make the Call as well, that are always trying to make sure that people are getting all the benefits they are entitled to.
Can I just say, sorry, Tina, thanks to Marty for the comments there, and to acknowledge that, yes, those on the lowest incomes are, inflation is much higher for them because they're spending so much more. And this crisis is across the board. I mean, my research was with women, obviously, so it's all women included in there, but and they have been traditionally impacted more by these crises, but it is across the board and it is affecting everybody. And the mental health impacts of it are absolutely huge. And I think that a lot of people at the minute are because there's been little action, both locally in terms of, what's out there to help people, but also and in terms of what's come from Westminster, that people often feel like there's no hope of anything, and that's hard. And that's hard on people's mental health as well, to feel like, there's nothing coming down the line. So I think that the louder that we can all shout about it, the better, because we need to be trying to give people some hope.
Absolutely. Thanks. Lucia?
Yes, hello folks. Hello Siobhan, thank you for that presentation. I've just been reading through the larger report as you were going through the findings, the summary of findings, and I just find it absolutely, as Tina said, harrowing that 2.5 million women have attempted suicide over the period of your research. And I mean, it's just unbelievable that whatever you've told us has now has probably been worse since COVID, and you've got all the COVID figures all in there too. And I mean, there's that much impacting on society at the minute with the research into post-COVID and poverty and that. What I have a question on, in presenting these findings to the Assembly and to the powers to be, who should be fully aware of what is going on in society. I mean, it's just absolutely the rising number of industrial action, the rising Women's Support Network partnerships that are involved in trying to help and trying to tackle poverty, and the fact that all of us are doing everything in our power to alleviate, to make our voices heard and to have it alleviated in our society. What are the Assembly and what are the powers to be? What do they know and what have they pledged to do? Or are they just going to let us all, continue to fight and fight with no response from them? Thanks.
Thanks, Lucia. Myself and a couple of other people had organised an event last week in Stormont. It was called Crushed by the Cost of Living, and it brought together a range of organisations, including the unions, and a lot of organisations working against poverty and highlighting the impact of the cost of living crisis on people, as well as a number of people with lived experience of the crisis across, different things like housing, children and families, social security, caring, and work. And it was a very powerful event, and the politicians were all invited, and there were a number of them there. Although, some parties were represented more than others, and they had an opportunity to hear it. And there was a lot of, you'll probably have heard Dr. Keir Fitzpatrick on the media talking about all of that. And unfortunately, the response here always seems to be that there is no executive, so there's nothing that can be done, and one party seems to be blaming the other party there. So it's very frustrating, because out of that event, we presented 4 emergency asks that, if the executive got back up and running, that could be done straight away to help people. And that included things like pausing debt deductions from Social Security, which doesn't, cost anything for the politicians here to implement, and ending removal of the 2-child limit, and a reinstatement of the universal credit uplift, and then one-off payments to those in receipt of disability and carers allowance. And those asks are all out there. We've all of the organizations that were involved have been doing media work and trying to get, that message out there. But really, there is very little forthcoming from our politicians in relation to getting any of those implemented. I know there was an assembly question asked to Minister Hargey about the pausing of the debt deductions, which would probably be the easiest one to do. But again, a very non-committal response. So I don't know what to say to you other than that, where we just continue to try and make our voices heard around what we think needs to happen, and what is needed to support people here, in the hope that at some point somebody will listen.
Yeah, thanks very much, Siobhan. Just to finish off then, I mean, everyone's talking about us coming into a winter of discontent and a spring of discontent. And I mean, I think in supporting each other, if unions are out fighting for every penny, yourselves and the other consortium members, that support needs to be, from both, from the local community. And I know social security workers do sometimes get a hard time, but at the same time, some of us, most of us have been in the role maybe 30, 40 years and have only ever done the best in our work to ensure that the benefits are paid to people where they're needed. And I mean, as far as I think we should be looking towards a general strike with everybody out, everybody down in tools, and everybody involved in seeing this government for what they are. But that's my personal opinion. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Lucia. And you're right, and we've always had, even when in the civil service, we've been taking strike action. We're very conscious of trying not to take it out in areas where we know we're paying out benefits and allowances to people that are, and some of them are actually our own members, to people that need the money. So we try to focus our campaigns to make sure that they're hitting the right place and not the wrong part of society. And there's a link there Siobhan has put in to the summary for the document that Lucia had referenced as well. Have we any other questions or comments for Siobhan? And thanks, Claire, for your comments into the chat too.
Hi, I have a question. Just in terms of trying to mobilize the executive or mobilize our politicians, could we bombard them with mail to get them to set up and take notice?
Yeah, I mean,
could we get all our NIPSA members across Northern Ireland and every other union member to bombard their MLA's offices with complaints, and just say, this needs to be addressed now?
I think anything which pays the pressure on is a good thing. We had a following that crushed by the cost of living event that I said to you about. We had produced a template letter for people to write to their local MLAs, asking, pushing for those emergency asks that we had highlighted at the event. So, we're trying to encourage people to get in touch with their local politicians and keep hammering this home as much as possible. So, I think if it's done from every angle there is, then it can't be a bad thing.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe it's something we can look into and see if we can get the Northern Irish Congress to take forward, Barry, to get all unions involved as well. Just see there's a comment in the chat from somebody who can't talk because they're in the office. Is there any help available, Siobhan, or anywhere we can look at for people who are facing bankruptcy?
Yeah. I would always suggest that you contact some of the advice sector, independent advice sector. I used to work for Citizens Advice when Citizens Advice had a presence here, and I saw the impact of good quality debt advice. It is phenomenal if you can get the advice you need. So if you're stuck in a difficult situation, that is definitely the best place to go. Now, I know they're inundated and they're busy, but you can make an appointment. And I would stress to anybody that's worried about money in any shape or form, to contact their local debt advice agency. You know, there's the like of Advice NI, but there's also Christians Against Poverty as well. You know, there are agencies out there that will help, and it's amazing the difference that it makes to get good quality advice, even to just talk about it and acknowledge, you know, the debts you have and what can be done to help. It can massively help in terms of somebody's mental health too.
It really does. I've used their services of debt advisors in the past, when credit card debts just seem to be spiraling, and they really help. And they also help you then manage that debt and engage with credit card companies or whatever company it is that you need to deal with. So yeah, totally recommend it. Get advice from any of the advisors you can, and it's free. Don't be going to someone that's going to charge you.
No.
Geraldine?
Tina, thank you so much. Siobhan, I just want to thank you for a very important and very powerful and very distressing piece of research. And just to let members know that the trade union movement will be launching a campaign that is focused on the cost of living crisis that's facing workers and their families. And that campaign is going to be launched in Stormont on Monday, the 10th of October. So the title of the campaign is Workers Demand Better. And that will be formally launched, as I said, on the 10th of October. So we need to get behind this campaign and all the campaigns that are happening in terms of trying to address this cost of living crisis and the impact that it's having on families and communities in Northern Ireland. But just in case our members are not aware of that, the trade union movement are doing something, and that's happening on the 10th of October. Tina, you're on mute.
Talking away to myself. Sorry about that. And saying thanks for that, Geraldine. Do we have anybody else then that would like to raise a point or ask a question? If not, then I'm happy enough to thank Siobhan again. I know, Siobhan, you've got quite a few of us have been thanking you, and it has, and I'm sure it hasn't been very easy to gather this information. I'm sure it takes its own toll on you as well. It's difficult, and the only thing is that I think we have solidarity throughout our whole movement to try and fight for a better society and better support for all those that are really, can't even say it now, who are really struggling. Mm-hmm. So thank you, and thank you all for attending. And
Thank you very much.
No problem. And we'll